Hi, this is Pat Moore with More Insights and Strategy, and I am here with my co-host, Melody Brew, Vice President, Principal Analyst, FinTech, and now Retail Tech. Mel, how are you?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Good, good. Just kind of swing into the weekend here. I love podding on a Friday. I've got my morning pod with Daniel Newman. He was in Barcelona, or as he
Oh,
said,
nice.
in his bunker. And I'm going to be leaving for Barcelona tomorrow for Mobile World Congress. But I'm glad we got this in here. I was the big disappointment of last week. I live by my calendar, Mel, and when the family doesn't put things on the calendar, and I live by the calendar, I get into this mismatch. But there was no way I was going to miss Catherine's senior walk at Baylor, where she's captain of the equestrian team there. And, we walked the line with flowers, people,
Oh,
clapped and people cried. Last meet, home meet of the year. They still have Big 12s and nationals. But I appreciate everybody hanging in here. And Mel, thank you for not firing me and finding another co-host. I do appreciate it.
nope. I'm willing to wait a week. It's all right. Now we just get to do back-to-back weeks,
I
two
know,
in a
that's
row.
great. I know, that's great, and I'll be back, Friday. It's gonna be super. But hey, let's dive in. I mean, we have so much to talk about, today. We have, retail's hot and cold customer, essentially talking about how weather affects retail and retail apps. We're gonna be talking about, for the love of money and romance, frauds. This is gonna be an interesting one. GoCryptoMe, essentially what's going on, what happened in Canada, and what's happening in Ukraine right now. And we're going to end with my favorite topic, which is the acronym of the week, which I always screw up, but this time it's trust. You can trust me. So I'm going to nail this one. You're going to nail this one, and it's going to be great. And then we're going to end up with kind of what's on Mel's research report for retail and fintech. You ready to dive in?
Ready to dive in. Yeah. So I think, this is funny. Sometimes we start our podcast with talking about the weather because we live in Texas and the weather is crazy here.
Yeah.
Right now it happens to be freezing. Just 2 or 3 days ago, it was 85 degrees. Today it's 30. I think it was 30 when I took my kids to school this morning. Didn't have school canceled because we didn't have any rain or ice. But it really got me thinking about just the, sort of how weather affects retail and just general app and fintech trends. So really, weather does affect consumers' mood, which influences their buying behavior and dictates what they purchase, when they purchase, and how much they're willing to spend. So this actually goes beyond just like what we're talking about, like, cold beer and umbrellas. This is actually like understanding the relationship between these moods, these kind of like weather predictions and the buying patterns. And this understanding this relationship is really valuable for brands and for marketers. So this data can be leveraged to market products at the most profitable time, the most impactful way. And really by executing weather-based marketing campaigns, brands can really gain a competitive advantage. In some categories, you see as much of a 12% increase in website traffic on wet or cold days. And you would assume that you would see actually, at least I sort of my hypothesis was that, on warmer days, you would see probably more traffic in brick and mortar stores. That's not always true. In some geographies where it's not typically warm, people don't want to shop on warm days. They actually want to just go out to the park and run around. So it's really important that brands and retailers and marketers pay attention to these things, and really actually that they understand the effect in each category. And that takes planning and data and agility. And, when we're talking kind of about like hot and cold customers, the customer in this sense isn't always the end user or the shopper. So right now we're seeing a lot of enterprise solutions for customers. So the customer at this point can be the retailer, QSR, brands, whatever that may be. And that we're seeing all kinds of solutions that I think are really interesting, like data tracking. So both IBM and Dell, I'm sure others, have solutions for seasonal and sub-seasonal forecasting that help retailers manage promotions, inventory, and even things like staffing, right? Like
Yeah.
these are all kind of things like you kind of make the assumption, I think the cold beer and umbrella assumption, right? But like when you really go into all of the other, data points, it's really interesting. I also, saw some really interesting things in sensors. Cisco Retail is using a bunch of sensors in a number of ways. Things like temperature monitoring to reduce the risk of food. Food. I mixed two words together.
Spoon and food, baby. I don't know. A
Food
plastic,
spoiling.
yeah, a spood. That's good.
Food spoiling during like hot weather or power interruptions. They also use sensors for inventory management for things like fulfillment needs, so that they have just precisely enough of what they need. This isn't necessarily weather related, but just precisely enough of what they need, so they can actually detour a truck to not make a stop. So there is actually sort of a weather, meaning an environmental impact of that. So I think, as we look at just, like we've talked about this massive digital transformation that the retail industry is having to make, I think we'll see a lot of things in edge, cloud, AI, all playing a big role in managing not just weather trends, but, seasonal environmental disaster preparedness. There's so many things that, on the enterprise side that can be done that can really help save money, save time, save resources, environmental factors, all of these things. I just think, that's a really interesting part on the enterprise side. And then, if you just look at things like banking app usage, of course, things like that are going to increase if you can't drive in the snow or you can't get out, you're going to use your banking app. People are more likely to use. Sorry, there's the dog. I'm going to let you say what you feel about this.
Yeah, so I'm going to share. A screen here. If you want to go take care of that, we can do that. Or you can stay there if you'd like. But no, I need to introduce you to Bob Lord at IBM. He actually runs the weather company inside of IBM, and what he has done is he set up all of that weather data to be API driven, pretty much with an access to anybody's cloud. In addition, of course, to the IBM cloud, but application providers use his data to do those intelligent things that you're talking about. I had the chance to have Bob on a podcast a few months ago. One of the 6.5 podcast. Daniel and I were talking to him about what he was doing in advertising. But anyways, I think this is cool, and I'm glad you brought that up. And it's funny, since COVID, I haven't shopped a lot in retail. So, and I just remembered, oh my gosh, I remember when we used to go out and do that. When it comes to clothes, I mean, I have a weird fit body, and if I don't try clothes on, it's just not going to happen. So
yeah, I think some people are getting used to that, shop at home thing. And these are all really important things that all of this data has to kind of come together to figure out one, not when we're talking, we're talking specifically about weather in this instance, but we're just also talking about like the way that people choose to shop now that things are sort of, coming back to quote normal, right? And there are just, millions of data points that, your traditional mom and pop shop wouldn't typically have. They do have access to now. It's an easier solution now. It's like you were saying, like these APIs that can help them solve these issues rather than, it's not just, Best Buy and the Gap and Nordstrom that get to have this information. It's all available, now at a much smaller scale.
Yeah. So let's bounce into our next topic here, which it's so funny when we were talking about in the green room, I didn't know exactly what you were talking about. It's like, well, wait a second. No, I saw this on Netflix. And I don't know if that's exactly what you're going to talk about, but my wife and I watch this. Essentially, it's where, fraud in romance. So what's going on here?
Yeah, it's hugely on the rise, and I don't know that Netflix show, but this was sort of planned for kind of Valentine's Day timing, but delayed a bit. But just in the last week or so, or around Valentine's Day, 5 different federal agencies, including like Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and FinCEN, which is the Financial Crime Enforcement Network, all came together for this national awareness effort on dating or defrauding. So there's been a 48% increase in romance frauds year over year in the last 2 years. So it's just massively on the rise. I mean, you can kind of understand.
What does that mean? Can you give us an example of what do you mean by romance fraud?
So,
I mean,
I've been
married 31 years. So, this whole notion of romance is like, I need it explained to me. So
I'm sure this is probably something that happens on this Netflix show. I probably need to watch it. But basically, when, somebody strikes up a relationship with somebody online, either through a social network or a dating app, and then gets them to send them money. And typically, it's one of these catfish situations where the person doesn't actually exist, or they're not who they say they are. They use things as sophisticated as deep fakes to, impersonate somebody else. They somehow get them to send them money. And then we're talking like millions of dollars. So I think, that part's interesting, but really, I think what the interesting part of this is really how like digital identity is working to fight this sort of fraud.
yeah.
And again, something that's kind of been happening on the enterprise side, so people or companies like Amazon and Apple and Google have these kind of systems in place that protect the identity of their employees and their partners. But now I think on the enterprise side, they're starting to recognize that they need to protect the identity and security of their customers and consumers. So there's all kinds of technologies that are now kind of coming to the forefront, not just like checking, KYC and AML, obviously, but like if you go into Bumble or one of these dating sites, they're not doing KYC, they're not doing AML. You can I could go on and make a profile and say, I'm Pat Moorhead. And, there are ways that you can verify it through your LinkedIn, but all those things are actually pretty easy to spoof as well. So there's all kinds of really interesting technologies that are coming out to help to prevent this. So liveness detection into anti-spoofing techniques. So these are basically biometrics that can be used on a mobile device or desktop computer without any sort of like complicated hardware that you would need for, biometric fingerprints or anything like that.
Yeah, there's two companies that I've run into. One of them is it's called Telesign, and they are behind a very huge percent of all authentication that's out there. And then there's the visual one called Onfido. I always want to call it Onfido.
I know.
That I've had a couple conversations with, but this is hot for the very reason. And I liked, the way that you were getting it. I can't believe you haven't seen the Tinder Swindler. You have to watch this on Netflix. I thought for absolutely sure, because the same week it came out during Valentine's Day, I think was the week that this hit. The week that this hit Netflix. I'm so amused that it had nothing to do with that. But you need to go back and watch this. It's amazing. He takes at least $1 million away from 4 women in Western Europe.
It's crazy. I mean, this has nothing to do with that show, but this is exactly why that show exists, because these things are actually happening in real life, and people are getting scammed out of, their life savings, and think about it. People are home, they're lonely, they're getting on these dating apps. They think they meet the love of their life. The love of their life all of a sudden, needs $5,000 to repair his car, or, something ridiculous like this. And it happens. And then, it's unrecoverable.
It's funny. It all comes down to one thing, which is when it comes to any type of scamming that's not technical, it's trust, right? Mm-hmm. Where you think it's somebody else, or they have different motives, or it's a complete catfish. Mm-hmm. And this Tinder swindler was essentially, it was a real person, okay? But he was using each successive woman's credit card to pay for his next woman's stuff, and pretending to pay them back. And he was in private planes. He was driving Ferraris to make it look like he had money. uh,
Oh, I
and
think
he
I
just
did
he
see
kept he
something
kept
like that.
he kept rolling it. He kept rolling it over, and for somehow after the show, he's a big Instagram star now.
Yeah, I think I saw something like that on it. Like they were supposed to be paid back. They did all this shopping for him, and they were supposed to be paid back. Yeah, I mean, this stuff is happening. And, in that case, these are sort of willing participants, but they did get swindled. But I think there is some responsibility on these, dating apps and social media sites to verify who users are
Yeah,
as these things start becoming more and more prevalent and people are getting scammed. When you look at just like the resources it's taken, if you're looking at like that we have FinCEN getting involved, that we're talking about government resources. This is not just costing these individuals money that are getting scammed. It's costing taxpayers
yeah,
because we're all paying for this.
exactly.
When you've got to have 5 different forces on this is something that, it has to be solved. And it's interesting. It's going to be, I think it's being solved by technology.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that we all get scammed. I mean, even if the bank's going to pay for it, no, the bank is either going to to cover those losses, they have to increase the fees,
Right.
or it comes out in their earnings, which in the end is, if you're a public company, is owned by the stockholders. So, and then they
Right.
end up footing the bill. So let's
Yep.
move to our next topic, which we're not going to get into the politics of it, we promise. But crypto had two political moments, and I think we're in the middle of it. I can't wait to talk about this, but I'm going to give you the floor.
We are really in the middle of it. And honestly, even before, like kind of putting thoughts together about what to talk about today, even things have changed in terms of Ukraine. But let's start with what happened in Canada.
Yeah,
There were a bunch of, what was happening on the Canadian border with the Truckers' Freedom Convoy. There was a GoFundMe campaign that was being funded to, to send to all these truckers. And that got shut down by the Canadian government. So then Bitcoin, which is thought of as, from a utility perspective, censorship resistant, people started sending cryptocurrency to fund the movement. So after that happened, then the prime minister then deemed the protest movement illegal and invoked what they called the Emergency Measures Act. So they were able to freeze all accounts associated with those Bitcoin addresses, with the Freedom Convoy's fundraising efforts. So from what I understand, a lot of the transfers were made prior to them being illegal, but they still froze the accounts. So I think, from my perspective, that is financial censorship. And it really does kind of sound the alarm for the, Bitcoin enthusiasts that self-custody and privacy are really central to the utility of these decentralized financial platforms. But, I also, to some extent, I understand it as well when it can become a slippery slope. When, if you have this sort of censorship resistance, it can clear the way for some illegal activity. So um, that's kind of, what was happening in Canada at the time. It also, there were some kind of big takeaways there, but actually we can talk about Ukraine first. We saw I think as of yesterday, it was all over the news that the Ukrainian military is being funded with Bitcoin. So that's actually not entirely true. The big people are sending Bitcoin to NGOs that support the military. So the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense actually has said that it will welcome donations for logistics and medical support, but said that it will only accept fiat, real. I shouldn't say real money. Crypto people hate me for saying that.
oh gosh, we're toast. Yeah,
Fiat money to its bank account. So if you did see those reports of crypto funding to the Ukrainian military to the tune of $4.4 million somewhat so far, which is nothing when you compare it to, what the Russian government is spending on this war, but still, it's a significant amount of money. That is being funneled into NGOs like Come Back Alive, which supports the military, kind of tangentially.
yeah,
So I think the big takeaways here are that your crypto isn't safe in an exchange. Even the CEO of Kraken, which is an exchange, said this on his Twitter. Like, he can't protect your money if the government says, or he can't protect your crypto. If the government says that that wallet has to be seized, they have no choice but to comply. So that's, I think it's also very hard for people to get their crypto out of those wallets. And many people don't understand the complexity of cold storage, actually holding your crypto off of an exchange. It also can be very, dangerous. I'm sure you've heard these stories of like people going into landfills because they had some hard drive that has their crypto stored from, years and years ago that's worth
Yes.
millions of dollars, but it's lost because it's in cold storage. So, but, and there's also ways to trace a wallet. So there's, even if it is anonymous, we saw this recently where the Department of Justice seized that $3.6 billion of stolen Bitcoin. So I think there's just a lot of big takeaways that I think people are learning from what's happening here, thinking that decentralized really means completely decentralized and anonymous and censorship proof. And there's some like real key learnings that are coming out of this. And that sort of, whether it's coincidence or purposeful timing, leads us to our acronym of the week, which is.
Can I weigh in on this one?
Yes, I would love for you to weigh in on this, actually.
No. So it's funny. It had the opposite impact for me. Well, I wouldn't say you didn't. I'm not saying the opposite here, but this was the big thing with the GoFundMe getting cut off and taking that money, which was like, oh my gosh, I totally can see how crypto can work. And then there were some people who could be shut down. There were some decentralized folks that sent letters to the Canadian government that said, we're sorry, we have no way to shut this down. This is decentralized. There's nothing, we have no idea whose money it is. We can't get in. So buzz off. Now, I don't know technically the fact or fiction behind that, whether they were taking a political stand. But if nothing else, it's super interesting. And you can imagine, by the way, putting a DAO behind to Ukraine, essentially, hey, who wants to fund a war with somebody? You don't like somebody? Then, hey, let's chip in. And hey, who should we invade first? Let's put that on the DAO. We'll vote how that happens. So a lot of stuff swirling, but incredible thing. So let's get into my favorite part of our show. That is the acronym of the week. Trust. Listen, I know what trust is, but do I really know what trust is?
So this is brand new. So even if you took a guess and got it wrong, this is like a week-old organization. This is the Travel Rule Universal Solution Technology. So essentially, this is a crypto organization that's building a system that complies with the travel rule requirements. So travel rule is a government rule that says any information about money being sent needs to be, the information about the person sending the money needs to travel with the money. So it needs to travel with that transaction. So this organization is trying to figure out a way to comply with travel rule requirements while still maintaining some degree of privacy and anonymity. I always get that word. That is, central to crypto and the value of having a digital sort of anonymous, decentralized currency.
Can I ask you a question real quick? When you say travel, what exactly do you mean? Do you literally mean like traveling somewhere? Or do you mean, or how it travels between exchanges?
It means the data of, say, if I'm sending you money, I can't just send that money. The information of who I am, where the money came from, and who it's going to, and the amount, all of that data around the money, basically it traces the money and it travels with the transaction.
Okay. Interesting. What does Coinbase have to do with this? Are they the ones who started it?
So Coinbase is one of the groups. There's a bunch of groups that are part of this organization. And really, Coinbase, I think, has kind of been leading the charge in a lot of this sort of forward-thinking regulation. They came out, we talked about this a few podcasts back, but they came out and said, we know that even in a decentralized platform, there's going to have to be some regulation. So let's create an arm where we actually have influence on this regulation. Because if you look at, the people who are kind of making up the rules for our current, financial system, most of them probably don't understand, modern technology to begin with. Then you add blockchain and cryptocurrency on top of that, and they're trying to build laws around an existing financial system that this is actually trying to be completely separate from.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily work. So Coinbase really has kind of taken the lead on, and now Robinhood has come along, and a bunch of others have actually come along and said, we want to comply with these rules. But I think what they're grasping at here is that the regulation is going to happen, so they might as well be a part of it and influence it than wait for it to be just imposed on them. And I think that's the right way to go.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I think I learned more new things on this podcast than I do in the entire week. And I'm not necessarily comfortable not knowing every detail. So I really appreciate that you bring this to us every other week. So, hey, let's talk about what's next. You're actually going to work and do research next week. Imagine that. What are you going to be working on? What's in your mind?
Well, so there's a lot of research stuff that's going on, but I actually have quite a few events coming up, which I'm kind of excited about, just because we've, haven't been able to do a lot of these things live. And well, I think you're going to Mobile World Congress, but then South by Southwest is coming up, and you will not believe this, Pat, but I have never been to South by Southwest.
Man, that is how long have you lived in Austin?
I've been here 3.5 years. So since I've been here, it's, been basically, I think the first year that I was here, maybe it was happening, but I wasn't around. I was traveling so much when I first moved here. And then, with COVID and everything. But really, I think I kind of want to do South by Southwest the way you do CES.
Yes.
Pop into the meetings that, it's such a long event, and there's so many things, and not all of them pertain to me, and I can't spend all of those days, all day, every day at that. So I think,
and it's multiple events too. I mean, it's music, movies, and tech.
Yeah, which is really why I think I never flew in for it before I lived here, because it's just so many things, and you really have to commit to being here for a big chunk of time, rather than going for one day of CES or something like that, just popping in. At the same time, as South by Southwest, Inc. Founder House is happening, and they have some really interesting speakers and some entrepreneurs, and a lot of things that kind of where the FinTech kind of startup scene began. So there's a lot of really cool things, a lot of fun speakers and events happening there. And next week I also have VentureBeat's Data Summit. And like we were talking about in retail and in FinTech, the data is, so paramount. So many things.
So is the VentureBeat one, is that here in Austin, or is
that's actually virtual? The other two are live in Austin.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm looking forward to events. I went to CES. I went to Berkeley to a quantum computing company, but it's definitely different. It's funny. I lost the travel muscle for sure. I just sat there and, gosh, what am I going to wear? I used to have a go bag that had everything in it, where if I just had to go, I would pick it up and I'm having to relearn how to travel. And the other odd part about going internationally is they have, depending on where you connect through, you have to have a different COVID type of regulations. And I'm thinking, okay, what if I'm fully vaxxed, but what if I get into a country and they had to rebook me into something where I needed a PCR test, right? Where I got redirected in a country that requires you to do that. I guess I get it at the airport or something. It's okay. I'll have a few drinks, a couple champagnes, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, take it easy. I mean, I am just seeing though that in places, even like the UK, they're just lifting so many of the restrictions.
Well,
So
the
I think,
U.S. Today lifted CDC lifted internal, and I wish that the CDC and the FAA would get together and say no masks on planes. We're good, but I leave tomorrow. It's Saturday. I leave tomorrow Saturday morning. So good luck on that.
yeah, probably not by then, but yeah, I mean, it's happening and it is nice. I do think there's a difference when you can meet somebody in person. And I think people think I'm crazy sometimes, but when I do have briefings and meetings, I usually request a video because
Yeah.
I think just seeing somebody and having a face-to-face conversation is just a different experience than having a phone call.
Yeah, it really is. And listen, I'm an introvert and I'm not supposed to like people or be around people. And even I got to the point of where I actually really missed being around people. I can't even imagine trying to start a business and engender trust in somebody
Yeah.
without actually meeting them. I think that would be tough. So listen, unless I eat, too much ham and cheese and wine, I will see
I'm
you
so
next week.
jealous.
And I just want to thank everybody for tuning in to this week's FinTech Friday. We might have to rename this to FinTech and Retail Tech Friday, but
I know.
that's a future discussion. We can pontificate that later. But thanks for tuning in. Give us feedback. Mel and I are both on Twitter. Let us know what you want to hear. Let us know what you liked about the show, what you'd like to see improved. But until then, thanks and have a great weekend.